Hey guys, OG Albino here, bringing you SPL Draft Notes Week 4, the show about everything and anything SPL related, where we talk about matchups, the previous week, and even have cool coach interviews in between. If you guys are excited for this week of Draft Notes, be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it a ton. We're working towards a goal at the end of the year of 5,000 subs, and I'd really appreciate it if you help me out along that journey and help push us towards that mark. But the support in the series has been great thus far. And yeah, with that being said, we're just gonna go ahead and jump right into last week's matchups and kind of go over how the games went, things like that. So first up, we had a game where it was Gator versus Kyle, where Gator was able to take home a nice 5-0 victory, and honestly a pretty darn hacksy match. And it did give us a pretty funny video from Kyle's end, where you got to load some Fortnite with the boys. But that turn 1 crit on the Clef obviously really set Kyle behind, and in general it just was a pretty unfortunate game after that. So we'll go ahead and keep going. Later, Gator's luck, continues, but that's always never a bad thing. It's not like it's anything you can control. Now we move on to Shuckleking versus Haydunn in his Colorado Rapid Spins. Shuckle taking home a nice 4-0 win here on the back of big Baxcalibur in a really interesting set. He was actually Swords Dance, Dragon Dance. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. I think he only ended up setting up Dragon Dances, which makes sense. But again, Haydunn's team just did not have anything for the Pokemon in general. I believe it was Clear Amulet for the Hitmontop as well. I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure it was. And it was able to really go to town with the Snow Defense boost alongside the Screens boost on Shuckle's side, really making him incredibly fat and incredibly dangerous once he got set up and going. Speaking of hacksy games though, like the Gator one, we had one with Joey versus Nexus. The recreation was pretty unfortunate, leaving Joey's mon a little bit lower than it needed to be, and then Jirachi did Jirachi things, but Nexus was able to take home a big upset over a player that was probably favored to win over him in that matchup. I think I might have had Joey in that matchup last week. I'm not 100% sure. So it was cool to see Nexus grab his first win and take home a nice 2-0 victory. Next up, though, we have Shady versus Drewby, and a really exciting matchup. I'm sure a matchup that a lot of you were super excited to see the Friendlock guys go at it. And this was a really good game. It was a 3-0 victory for Drewby, but it was a lot closer than the score indicated, to be completely honest. The Archaladon was looking to go absolutely insane, but Drewby with a really nice bring in Sacred Sword, Iron Boulder, putting in a lot of work. And then Big Probo Pass went absolutely crazy in that game too, so it was a really fun one to watch. Unfortunate dock errors, but hey, mistakes happen. That's life. And then next up we have Emvee versus CBAD, and I think this was a great game from Emvee, a masterclass, not only in play, played very well, but I think in the builder, it was very incredible and very well brought. I mean, Scary Face Annihilate, because the Gouging Fire matchup was that abysmal, was really smart stuff, and he was able to kind of get off on the front foot early from CBAD and never really give that Gouging the opportunity to set up. And it was one of those matchups where if Gouging literally got set up to +1/+1 and had the chance to straight up win the game with how chip things were. So very solid bring from Emvee. He was able to take home a nice and convincing 4-0 victory, moving himself to undefeated, or continuing his undefeated streak. Then we have PlayMore Esports versus Chimpact, a matchup I was really excited for. These are personally my favorite rosters in the league. I think PlayMore probably has the objectively best roster, and Chimpact has my favorite, and Chimpact was able to take home a nice 2-0 victory on the back of Drifblim, once again, not sweeping, but getting 4 kills in its little rampage it had there in the mid-game. Really showing why it's one of the better Terra captains. I mean, Chimp has Terra Reverum, and he's been popping off with this Terra Drifblim, which has been the exact opposite of what I thought originally. So definitely really fun to see. I think Chimp's team is so deadly because of that fact that he has 2 great Terra captains and really just like 8 great mods otherwise. Everything is bringable every week, and it makes it really tough in the builder to deal with that. Then our last game of the week was Uzi versus Leo. Uzi taking home a nice 4-0 victory on the back of Dragapult, the best Pokemon in Draft League history. I'll die on that hill. I think that thing is absolutely incredible, and Uzi used it really well this week and was able to really put the beat down on Leo, taking home a nice and convincing 4-0 victory. That puts our personal pick'em score to 16-5 on the season, so we're building a little bit of cushion. My goal is to always be at least above 500 with my guesses. I would love to be 75% of the correct, or 75% correct on my guesses. Now keep in mind, when I do these pick'ems, I don't do them based on any perceived player skill or how I think the game will go in that matter. I try and look as objectively as possible at the Pokemon matchup and what team I think has a better matchup, just to make things a little bit more interesting and more fun to talk about, obviously, because it's a little bit easier to say, like, I think this guy's going to win because he's super sick of the game, you know? So keep that in mind as we go through. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into our first matchup. for our first matchup. We have Joey and his Los Angeles Wakers and Gator and his Florida Gators. Now, from Joey's side, I think that Cinderace is essentially unguardable in this matchup. If you look at the water types, things like Samurott, things like Keldeo, they're not the bulkiest things in the world, to be completely honest. Really, the best answer to something like Cinderace is going to be something like Donphan, which is very, very liable to get chipped down. If something like Donphan is chipped down pretty consistently, that opens up the rest of the offense a ton. Things like Lycanroc, things like Scizor, and things of the sort. So I think Cinderace is going to be great in breaking open and getting this game going for Joey. I think Latias is extremely important here in checking both the likes of Keldeo and Iron Moth. A little bit more of a soft check to the Iron Moth, but Keldeo especially, because that thing is an absolute nuke. Otherwise, I think Spectre Scarf is really going to do him dirty. So we really need to make sure we have something for it, and I think Latias is going to be the best in that case. I think Terraferia Arboliva is great in this matchup. Now, you got to be a little bit careful about the likes of Goldango, but you're a great check to the likes of Samurott. You're a great check to the like of Keldeo. Again, it's going to help out. And even something like Zarude, which is obviously another big, big threat in this matchup. I think Thunderous Teeth looks really strong with the Nasty Plot set. If you go Nasty Plot, Electric Move, Grass Knot, Focus Blast, you're going to be in for a good time. You hit the majority of this team very, very hard. The only thing you don't really hit with that coverage is going to be something like Whimsicott, but if Whimsicott ever tears, you do hit it. And obviously, it's not like Whimsicott really appreciates switching into Thundy. It also has to be wary of taking a potential stray Sludge Bomb or something of the sort. So you could also potentially drop Grass Knot for Sludge Bomb instead and just get it, the Donphan a little bit chipped with something like Cinderace and hit a +2 Focus Blast and blow it up. I think that's a very viable option, so that's something to keep in mind. And then I think like a Helmet Scizor is potentially really nice here. It helps with Zarude, and it has Defog for the Samurott. If we don't want to get Spike Sacked on our side, I think potentially getting off a big Defog on that is going to be really clutch, because you're also a decent defensive check to it, and typically do force it out. You can just go Bullet Punch, U-turn, Knock Off, and Defog, and be a pretty solid set in this matchup, to be completely honest. Now, from Gator side, I think that Goldango is very, very strong here. There's a couple different sets you can go with, but I personally really like Scarf. Joey's Ghost Resists are a little bit flimsy, in my opinion. It's the likes of Hisui and Quillfish, which one I don't think is the best Pokemon here. It's not terrible, but it's also not going to appreciate Make It Rain. It also doesn't have any recovery outside of Pain Splitting, so I think potentially just throwing off Shadow Balls and Make It Rain is going to make this thing really annoying, and it pivots into a lot, takes a lot of hits naturally, and checks a lot of things decently well. So, really solid Pokemon. I think Specs Keldeo, like we mentioned before, can really break through. If we can pressure that Latias, eliminate it, or get it in a range of KO from a Hydro Pump, really everything else gets nuked by Specs Keldeo clicking the right button. So I think that's a potential really scary option. Speaking of choice Pokemon, Scarf Zarude also seems great. It's going to be a great offensive check to the likes of Latias, but it also pivots in on things like Thunderous and potentially Revenge It with like a random Rock Slide. Things like Cinderace with the same move. The likes of Lycanroc, also same thing. And Knockoff is very, very freelancing. Knockoff is one of the best moves in the game, but I think in particular it's going to be really solid here in removing items. I think Spadefta Nunstars is also a really solid shout here. It's really the only thing that I can think of that can kind of pivot into Thundy. You go some kind of Body Slam set and spread pairs, maybe a Glare, maybe Choppleberry, take that +2 Focus Blast a little bit better. So I think that's obviously really nice. I think Donphan checks Lycanroc and also spins really well, really stopping Joey from getting any kind of hazards game going. So I think that's obviously really, really solid here. And then I think if Lycanroc is removed or just doesn't come because the Donphan is there, Booster Speed Moth is a great endgame option for Gator. Now, overall, though, I am going to lean Joe in this matchup. I think that his top-end offense, things like the Cinderace, things like the Thunders, are really, really overwhelming for Gator, and if he can keep up offensive momentum and do a lot of damage, he's going to be in a pretty good spot. So we're going to go Joey here. Matchup number 2, and we have Leo versus Drewby, the Carolina Haxorus versus the New York Marauders. Now, from Leo's side, I think Ogre is insanely strong with dual stabs. It absolutely nukes through. I think realistically all you need is your stabs. You can go an SD Trailblaze set and really potentially win in the endgame. Now, something like Infernape would need to be chipped down. You could also go Stomping Tantrum over SD. Very, very viable option, but definitely does really well. Speaking of Pokemon that do really well offensively, Holy Bundle Batman. There's no resist to Bundle's dual stats. I mean, there typically isn't, but there's nothing on this team that really outbulks or like can like sit there with an AV and check Bundle long term. Best would be like Skuntank with an AV, but even then, I mean, you're not doing much back, right? And it's not like Skuntank is good into this team. It's actually quite terrible. So really, really strong matchup. I think Quill is great as a spiker here, really facilitating those top two in offense because it beats the potential removal on the opposing side, like the Quackleval with an Intimidate variant. It's going to be very, very annoying defensively. And it also checks things like the Rillaboom. It checks things like the Iron Boulder, and it even soft checks things like Infernape and can 1v1 them in a, given scenario. I think Uxie is a great check to the other physical offense. Again, things like Infernape, things like Quackleval, things like the Iron Boulder. It checks them really well. Now, it's very pressured, so you kind of want to spread the love a little bit. You can also do the same thing with Zapdos and check a lot of that physical offense really, really well. I think that defensive core of Uxie, Zapdos, and Overqwil is really good. And then I also think that endgame Manaphy is a very, very big possibility. If something like Rillaboom is gone, or if it does not come because you're playing into Overqwil, Zapdos, Ogerpon, if it doesn't come, I think Manaphy can super smoke in this endgame. So, really solid looking Pokemon here. Now, as for Drewby's side, I think Quavo is probably his best endgame. Now, you are going to need to chip down things like Zapdos, and potentially Pokemon like Appleton if they do end up coming, and Uxie, but Uxie's a little bit easier to chip down than Zapdos because Zapdos can click Roost, so it's going to be a little bit difficult to try and do so. You can use the likes of Rillaboom to chip it down, maybe get some knocks, rocks, all that stuff, maybe protective pads so you don't get staticked and things like that. I think G-Weezing is also solid into a lot of these Pokemon defensively, things like Tusk, things like Ogre. It's going to be a solid defensive check to the likes of those guys. I think Special Infernape is also really strong. A potential Nasty Plot variant does really, really well in this matchup. Doesn't have to worry about being intimed or checked by any of that physical offense, and gets off a +2 fire move into like the entirety of the team. Maybe a +2 Focus Blast into that Manaphy right there. I think Thundy is also really good offensively as well. Again, maybe a Nasty Plot variant, maybe just 4 attacks, maybe T-Waving and stopping things from getting out of hand. But overall, I think I am going to lean Leo in this matchup. I really do love his offense, and that defensive core of Uxie, Zapdos, Overqwil just seems really difficult to deal with all the hazards he's going to be able to potentially get up. For our third matchup, and again, I apologize if you hear some barking in the background. Puppy's barking at the neighbor dog, but we have Shuckleking versus CBAD here, and another Weather Wars matchup. I feel like we've been having a ton lately, or like Shuckle just keeps playing into opposing weather with his rain. Speaking of which, though, I think that like controlling the weather is going to be a really important aspect for him. I think if sun is up, he has a bad time. Just straight up. Has a terrible, terrible time in this matchup. So something like Pelipper is going to be really important to at least reset the sun. Maybe not necessarily as like a full rain mode, but like having that option to stop sun being up is really, really valuable for him, in my opinion. I really do like Gren and Baxcalibur in the sense that while CBAD has a good check to both of those guys in Primarina, they both break for each other in the sense that Prim's going to have to come in on one of them, and it's going to open up the endgame for the other. Now, I do envision that being the Primarina coming in on Baxcalibur, as Gren has Gungshot and Sludge Wave to hit the Primarina, whereas Bax has Thunderfang to hit the Primarina, or like neutral EQ. So I imagine you can use Baxcalibur in a way that hopefully breaks open the Prim in order to set up for a Greninja endgame with Battle Bond. I think that's a very, very viable option, but you can also take it a vice versa route, right? You force in the Prim, do a lot of damage with it, and then get out into the Bax to win a little bit later. And if Prim goes down, Bax can win, and so they can really work for each other really, really well. I think Kilowattrel stabs do well. I mean, they always do. Electric Flying is known for being an incredible offensive typing, stab-wise, and it's no different here. It's a little bit tough because you can't really reliably hit those Hurricanes, so you might be air slashing into Pokemon like Mamoswine, which might not do as much damage, but still does a decent amount nonetheless. The only issue is you really don't want to do very little damage into Gouging Fire with air slash, so gonna have to be a little bit wishy-washy. No, and I think Mienshao also does really well offensively and can break early. Maybe even like some kind of lead focus that shit with Swords Dance. The combination of Close Combat, Knockoff, and Poison Jab actually does a lot of damage and can potentially put CBAD on the back foot if he doesn't lead well into it. So I think that's another potential option. Now, as for CBAD's side, I mean, Wake absolutely demolishes in this matchup. Whether there be sun up or whether there be rain up, those water moves, those Hydro Steams are hitting, baby. They are doing a ton of damage. And outside of that Hatterene and Bronzong, which don't appreciate taking those water moves or fire moves in the sun, Draco is super, super free. And this Pokemon's going to be really, really powerful. I don't know if you necessarily want to lock. You could go Choice Specs, but you can also go some kind of Life Orb set, maybe even some kind of AV set to soft check things like Greninja. Regardless, it's going to be very, very powerful. I think gouging smokes in sun. Obviously not in rain, but in the sun, nothing switches into gouging, and I think this game is absolutely no different. Your dual stabs are absolutely insane, and you nuke through everything. It's kind of the downside of having Haydunn as your fairy, is a lot of these offensive dragons are going to have really good matchups into you. I think Corviknight, as much of a Corviknight hater as I am, walls like half the team. A SPL Corvi is probably a better check to Gren than Prim will be, and I can totally see that being the check to a Battlebond variant and kind of keep it in the back. It also checks the heck out of Ursaluna, it checks the heck out of Haydunn and Bronzong, and even mons like Pelipper, because they can't scald it anymore. I mean, and even mons like Lamora, like SPL Corvi does really, really well alongside that FizzDef Prim, which should be used to check the backs, but can also be used to check the likes of Greninja if you really do need it. And then I think Terra Trode also got great momentum in this game, got him pretty free volt switches in this game, and being a solid Terramon in general. Overall, I am going to give the matchup to CBAD. I think that his offense, and again, that dual Dragon Core is so unbelievably strong. It's going to be really hard for Shuckle to deal with them. For our next matchup and our interview matchup, we have KyleAye and his Miami Dawn fans looking to bounce back against Nexus and his Toronto Tyrants, who are actually looking to keep a win or get a win streak going, actually. So really, really important game for both of these guys. Now, from Kyle's side, I think this is one of the best X-Control matchups I have ever seen. The ground resistance on this team are abysmal. It's realistically only the Meowscarada. Other than that, we are clicking Earthquake, Iron Head, and Rock Slide accordingly, doing a ton of damage, rapid spinning away some hazards if we need to. I don't think you ever need to SD in this matchup. I think you just bring Life Orb 4 attacks and you go to town because of that. I think because of that, you obviously need to bring T-Tar, but that's not necessarily a bad thing this week. It's going to be a great Kyurem check. You're going to be able to eat Focus Blast or Body Presses at least once, and you'll be a great Choice Specs Kyurem check, which does really good, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. You can tech on moves like Low Kick to punish the Ursaluna for coming in, and kind of just like knock off, plus a Rock move afterwards and be a big nuisance. So really solid Pokemon in this matchup, at least in the sense that it facilitates drill, and it's pretty good defensively and do a few things. I think that Terra Vikavolt is going to be the Terra of Kyle's choosing this week. I think Terra Steel is invaluable in this game. It lets him soft check so many Pokemon with that Levitate on top of the typing. You're going to soft check Pokemon like Kyurem, soft check Pokemon like Ursaluna, Pokemon like Enamorus, Pokemon like Jirachi, Pokemon like Meowscarada. You're going to check them all pretty decently well, which is really valuable, and potentially get up webs, which can really slow down any non-Boots variants that Nexus wants to go for. If he doesn't go Boots Kyurem, having that Kyurem at -1 speed is pretty darn clutch in a lot of instances. You don't need your sand as much. So I think that's definitely really, really solid. I think Moltres is solid here, and it checks most conventional Meowscarada checks. When I say that, we'll get to it in a little bit, but it's also a great check to Enamorus, a great check to Jirachi, and can even pivot in on ground moves from the likes of Ursaluna and take on non-specs hits from Kyurem if you're more physically defensive, obviously. And if you're specially defensive, you check Kyurem decently well, this is Ancient Power. So I think Moltres is really solid here. I think if the Jirachi ends up getting chipped or doesn't come, and it could very well get chipped by Rocky Helmet Moltres, I think Agility Latios is really strong as a win con in this game. When I was mocking Nexus for this week a little bit, I ended up bringing Mirror Herb because I think it's a really solid anti-Blastoise measure. If that thing Shell Smashes, you give Latios a Shell Smash and it might be game over. Obviously, Meowscarada Sucker Punch is something you have to play around, but if that's not there, it does pretty darn well. Or you could be sub in that regard too. But in general, even without that, I think if you do chip down that Jirachi, you get up in agility, this thing's really strong here, or you can just kind of click buttons once the Jirachi goes down. You can go like a Specs variant or just a 4 attacks variant in general. Also makes a lot of sense here. Now, from Nexus' side, I think Kyurem absolutely smokes. Whether it be Specs or 4 attacks Boots, it goes crazy. Ice Beam, Freeze Dry, Draco, Focus Blast is really all you need. Specs is going to allow you to break past more conventionally specially defensive Pokemon like a Spadef Clef, or something like a Tentacruel, a little bit easier with Freeze Dries. You're going to 2-hit KO it pretty convincingly. Whereas Boots is going to be beneficial in the sense that you can switch up moves on like of a Terra Steel Vikavolt or a Tyranitar that's coming in, taking an Ice Beam, taking Chip, and then dies to a Focus Blast afterwards. So I definitely think Kyurem is really strong. I think nothing kills Ursaluna in one hit on this team. It is absolutely ridiculous, whether it be with an Assault Vest variant to check the likes of Latios a little bit better, or whether it be with a Swords Dancing variant to really, really break through this team with like dual stabs plus Heavy Slam. Really just hits everything incredibly, incredibly hard. So really, really solid Pokemon. I think Meowscarada is really strong with hazards. If you get a knockoff onto that Moltres and its Boots, you get rid of those guys, and it's taking 50% from rocks every time time, it's not going to be a great switching anymore. And outside of that, doesn't have great switchings in general. You can also tech on Power Gem for the Moltres and really smoke it after hazards, or if you're Protean, just kind of nuke it from full. So that's a really, really cool option for the Meowscarada. I think that Toxicroak also does really well with its Prio and Terra. You probably Terra Dark in this game. There's really, really solid in throwing off really strong sucker punches, as well as turning into resistance or an immunity into Latios' Psychic instead of just dying to it. I think Jirachi also looks solid. It checks Clef, Lottie, passes some wishes potentially, but really is probably just a solid rocker in this game. And then Blastoise also looks really strong with the Shell Smash variant, whether it be physical or special. I think I lean physical. I'd personally probably go Liquidation, Crunch / Ice Spinner. I'd probably lean Ice Spinner for the Ogerpon in particular. And then last move can either be Earthquake for the Tentacruel, or it can be Aqua Jet to potentially revenge a drill in and out of sand, which is really, really nice. So overall, I am going to lean and give the matchup to Nexus. I think that Drill can definitely pull this out, and this is a very, very close game, but Nexus has the upper edge in my opinion because of a lot of his offense. However, we get to hear from the man himself. Our interview this week will be with the only coach that matters, Mr. KyleAye. Let's go ahead and jump on into that interview. Alrighty guys, here we are with the man of the hour, the only coach that matters, Mr. KyleAye. How you doing today, man?
Hey, what's up, man? I'm good. How about you? What's up, everybody?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you coming on the show and talking to me really quick. Should be a pretty quick interview. Just want to go over some fun things, talking about the season thus far, the season upcoming, and this week, obviously, with a really fun matchup against Nexus. Now, first off, heading into the halfway point of the season, we're just getting into week 4 here. Has there been any members on this, Gen 6 inspired Sand team of yours that has stood out, whether it be Drill overperforming or one of your low tiers being heck of fun, whether in the builder, in mocks, in the battles themselves? Has anything stood out or surprised you?
Honestly, I'm enjoying Houndstone a lot more than I thought I was going to. I just was like, oh, Sandsweeper, okay, I'll get it, but it's actually been pretty cool to mess around with and take a look at. So I'm definitely happy about that too, with it being a Terra Captain also, like in a Sand Sweeper potential role. So I'm just like, this is really cool, where like I kind of felt like I quote unquote had to take it, Yeah. And I'm like, oh, this is actually enjoyable to use. So I'd probably have to go with that. I think Ghost Dog has been pretty clutch.
Oh yeah, good one offensively, but like defensively also super clutch as well with Fluffy, Terra Fairy, and Fluffy, I think it's fighting that you have too. Yeah, I could do a lot. Good spin blocker. Yeah. Really cool mon. Now, obviously we just said this season you have Sand, but Lottie Sand in particular, which is one of my personal favorite draft archetypes. The Lottie Drill works so well together, especially along guys like T-Tar. Clef is a staple in that playstyle too. But you've also used a lot of weather throughout your draft career. I mean, I've seen you use hail, I've seen you use rain. What would you say your personal favorite, weather style in draft is, as a guy who drafts it pretty often?
That's a good question. Me personally, I don't want to give an indirect answer, but maybe just offer a different kind of perspective to it. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really apply to this current team that I have, but my favorite kind of technique to do is actually more similar to Shuckle-King's team, whereas I like to have a team and then add a form of weather or
have a weather
terrain.
Aspect, yeah, not a weather team, but weather to your team.
Correct, yeah, almost as an extra option. Whereas this is, I've done rain teams before, but it's okay, you take Pelipper and then you just kind of build for that. Mm-hmm. But this is my first time ever trying to do this with Sand. So it's definitely interesting, and I'm enjoying it. But I'd say my preferred method, my favorite method, is grab a terrain setter or a weather user later on, and then get one thing that I could just kind of throw on there.
Yeah, the cool low tier option or something. I remember there was that one BBR season where you used. I remember you smoked me with the Aurora Veil Arc Division under the hail, which was crazy too. So it's small stuff like that. No, really cool stuff. No, that's definitely fair. And again, it becomes, when you have whether it's Sand or rain in particular, it feels like it's restricted for your opponent in the sense that they know what they have to build for. It's overwhelming, but they can kind of get an idea. It's almost restrictive in the builder too sometimes if you're super hard and I need to bring weather. And I think your team is definitely weather centered, But it's also not a team that needs to have sand in the sense, too, that like guys like Drill can run, effective mold breaker sets, and guys like T-Tar can come as, their own setup win con with like, a DD and a weakness policy or something like that. So that's definitely very, very fair. Now, going into week 4, we have a really fun matchup in Nexus. 2 of the biggest personalities in the league. I love watching both your guys' stuff, how excited you guys get. So I'm sure a ton of people are really excited for this matchup. Can you give us some insight into your building process this week, how you approach taking on Nexus, and honestly, probably one of the more scary teams in the league?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that you enjoy watching us. But yeah, no, I'm definitely excited to play Nexus. We battled a couple times throughout different leagues, but I didn't get to play him in season 1 of the SPL. So I'm excited to just go against him in general. The kind of approach that I had for the match here was there was a few times in the draft where I ended up sniping him. Not on purpose, but you know how it is. But we were right next to each other. So I would be like the pick before him and then ended up sniping him. So initially, I wanted to try and bring all of those mons to just kind of like set it,
poke fun a little bit.
Have the message sent, and be like, hey, boom, here you go. But I ended up not doing all of them because there was 2 or 3. So, but basically, I was looking at his team, and his team is so scary, man. Because it's like Kyurem, Jirachi, and Amorous is already just an insane Fairy Dragon Steel Core, but then you add Meowscarada, and then Ursaluna. Like, there's just a bunch of big hitters on that team, and it's it was fun to build for. I wanted to try and have some heat, try and have some stuff mixed in. Also, course. Because I know. Like you, I also like to watch Nexus, and I like his reactions, his personality behind things. So I want to try and see if I can
get some out of
throw him off his game a little bit, So that's kind of what I'm trying to do in the matchup.
No, that is totally fair. Nexus is a really, really scary team, but you have some cool pieces in the matchup. And I remember in particular, he was screaming on stream the other night. I was watching him because you named the Moltres Talonflame and ended up sniping over right before it and stuff like that. So I'm hoping Moltres ends up coming and popping off because it's definitely pretty good into him. Now, we kind of just talked about a little bit how you didn't get to play Nexus last season, but the SPL's roster last season and this season is obviously absolutely insane. This season in particular with the Legacy format, and you got guys like Shady coming back and PlayMore and stuff like that. You've had some killer matchups thus far, and up to this point, but looking ahead, is there anyone else you're most excited to play the rest of the season, or is there someone that's not on your schedule that you're hoping that you can run into in the playoffs this year and get a game off from, whether it be rivalry or just, really wanting to play them?
Well, I'm kind of bummed that I didn't get to play against Haydunn because I've never got to battle him. The only time that we've been in a battle together was like the Sun and Moon Battle Royale. We did like a free for all.
The little in the little ring and stuff like that, or
we did that like once. So like I was really hoping I would get to play him because I've only got to play Shady once, but like I did at least get to play Shady before. But I'm really excited that I got to play Gator and Chimp. Definitely, I'm happy I get to play against PlayMore. John Tar Heel. So and then. Tyler, John's editor, I believe is his name. Yeah. So that dude seems super funny in their videos. I'm loving their videos, so I'm excited to play them. Super happy to play Nexus. I'm really happy with everyone that I did get to play. I'm just like, I really wish I could have got to play him too. Because I don't have Leo on my schedule, but I've played Leo.
He was the one guy to cross off the bucket list. Like, all right, we got to play a game. We're good. Yeah. No, that's totally fair.
Yeah.
That is definitely valid. Now, do you have any other final words before you end off the interview? Like I said, a pretty quick one before I let you go, and before we see you take on Nexus in a couple days.
I just want to thank you for people that don't skip this part of the video. Y'all are hype, and OG League. We got OG Albina even on the interview.
Exactly.
All the OGs.
That's the only reason Joey let me stick around. He was like, one more season. I was like, hi.
Yeah, no, man. I'm excited. So. I'm pretty much looking forward to it. Not the ideal start that I wanted, but I'm just trying not to repeat last season. I'm trying to bounce back. So.
Oh yeah, plenty of time. Plenty of time.
Yeah, hopefully I can make it happen, man.
For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. And good luck in your game this week.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Alrighty guys, next up we have Haydunn and his Colorado Rapid Spins against Shady Penguin and his New York Yankees. Now, from Haydunn's side, this is another great Darkrai matchup. In all honesty, the combination of Dark Pulse, Sludge Bomb, and Psychic absolutely smokes in this matchup. Your last move can be anything like Ice Beam for a Landorus or Focus Blast for an AV or Chaladon, but realistically, your first three moves almost cover the team perfectly neutrally or super effectively. You'll do a ton of damage, especially if you can get that Grimmsnarl coming in once on a Sludge Bomb. You're going to be in a really good position. I think SD Gliscor also looks great into matchups like this, where you have defensive pivots and things like Landers that can switch in, but they can't really do much to you. And it's also a great setup opportunity. You get great setup opportunities on the likes of Sneasler, setting up Swords Dances, and then if that Rotom gets chipped down into range of a +2 Facade or Knockoff, you're kind of cooking with gas at this point. This Pokemon looks really strong, has a great speed tier in the matchup, and a lot of the Pokemon on the team really struggle to break through it. So I think SD Gliscor does really solid. I think AV or T-Spike Shuckleking both work if you don't think that the Sneasler is coming, because you do have the Gliscor Glowking kind of defensive core. You could always elect to get up a T-Spike and really whittle down this team, especially if there aren't many boots around. But realistically, there's a lot of things off the ground that kind of avoid it, or things that run boots anyways. So I personally think that probably an AV variant is going to be your best bet when it comes to Glowking. I think an offensive Hisui Gudra also looks incredible in this matchup. Whether that be Assault Vest, whether that be Shuckleberry, or whether that be Choice Specs, it looks really strong here. There's not much that can pivot into it at all, in all honesty, on Shady's team. Now, outside of that, I think lastly, really the next best Pokemon in the matchup is going to be something like the Hitmontop. I think the AV in particular is pretty solid. Right now, there's not great pivots into things like Archaladon, but you can at least pivot in, take a hit, and, threaten some decent damage. Otherwise, you also soft check things like Zoroark, Hisui if they're not like specs or anything like that, which is obviously really nice. Moves wise, you can go with Close Combat, Mach Punch, Triple Axle, and then your last move is probably something like Earthquake, if I had to guess, for the Sneasler. But really, you could do a ton of different things. You could even go Rapid Spin if you're not worried about the Zoroark coming in on you, which is obviously really nice here. Now, on Shady's side, if one Steel Dragon does well on the other side, our Chaladon is even better, man. It's super strong offensively, and it has a much better speed tier than something like Gudra does, whether it be special, physical, mixed, whatever you want to go with. I think our Chaladon is going to be incredibly powerful here. I think Lando needs to come as a U-turn bot just to kind of pivot into the likes of Glowking, into the likes of Gliscor, and the likes of the Terra Jolteon, because it's not Terra Ice in this league, which is a really nice thing for Shady, because he got absolutely smoked by Terra Ice on paper. So that's obviously great. You can kind of come in, you can either be AV or like Rocks 3 attacks with the Yachi Berry in order to take an Ice Beam from Darkrai, an Ice Beam from Glowking, or an Ice Beam from the Hisui Gudra. I was thinking that Grimmsnarl probably comes to screens. There's also room for like a weird bulk up variant. I think that definitely can catch Haydunn off guard, but I think your screens, like, standard utility Grimmsnarl is going to be great. That's slowing down a lot of the offense that Haydunn does have on his squad. I also think that with that screens, you could see a bulk up weakness policy Acrobatic Sneasler really do some work in this matchup, being able to proc that weakness policy on a ton of threats, especially behind screens, and really go to town and do some work. In particular, really dealing with that Gliscor well and putting in some, definite damage on the team, especially if it is a more offensive Gliscor like Haydunn's been bringing as of recent. I think Rotom pivots well, as usual, kind of comes in, Volt switches around, and is a big nuisance in general, checks that Gliscor pretty darn well. I think Terra Ground Serena also looks very strong in this matchup, fighting Ice, grass and ground, or just obviously great coverage overall, and this week is no different. Honestly, you don't even need fighting because you have ground. So I guess just ground, ice, and grass in general looks really strong. I think Zoroark is also great here, in particular disguises Sneasler with the choice specs. The responses to Sneasler are not going to be responses to Hisui Zoroark, and we're going to be able to take advantage of that hopefully and throw some big Shadow Balls. This matchup was really hard for me when it comes to, who I think wins this one overall. I did lean Shady in this matchup on paper just because I think he has more options, but I think Haydunn's top-end offense does really well. I think this game can go either way, but I am going to lean Shady Penguin. Second to last, we have Emvee versus Chimpact. A really exciting matchup, to be completely honest. Now, from Emvee's side, I really love Panded Weavile in this game. I think Triple Axel is super free. The ice resists on this team are going to be the likes of Arcanine Sui, as well as the Reverum, which don't want to come in and take a knockoff, especially from Bandit. So if we can clip Triple Axel, do a ton of damage, maybe knock off a helmet before we do so, we're going to be in a great position to break through with that guy. As for our Mew, I think a Hazards Mew, maybe a lead set, maybe a helmet set is really solid here. I don't think that Chimp has great removal options. Actually, looking at it, I don't think he has removal options. Maybe Drifloon kept it. I'm not 100% sure. But regardless, not the best Pokemon to do so. And it's really hard to defog into Emvee's team, obviously, with his double, competitive Defiant core. So I think Spike stacking with the Mew is a very viable option, and it checks the likes of Dragonite, Ogerpon, and Iron Hands if it's physically defensive, which is obviously really nice. I like Scarf Cleavor a lot as well. It's a great way of revenging things like Torn. Now, obviously, there are great pivots into it in like Iron Hands. And actually, I guess really that's it. If we can kind of just catch that thing with U-turns, get out into Pokemon and threaten it, there's a real possibility for a Stone Axe endgame to potentially win with that guy. So I like Scarf a lot. I think Infernape. Annihilate looks very strong as always. It's a bit passive if it's just like your standard, bulk up set, bulk up taunt. I think Rest Talk is a very viable option. Especially because being physically defensive, if it is physically defensive, you're going to be a Rock Resist, which this team really struggles with having right now, and that's really good in the Arcanine. And you could potentially even go a mono bulk up or mono Rage set. There is no Ghost immunity on this team. Now, you are stuffed by Tinglu, but if you get to a point where you're bulked up enough and, you got enough Rage Fist boost, it doesn't really matter what Tinglu does if he's not whirlwinding you out, right? You kind of just wall him indefinitely. So it's something to keep in mind, or if we feel like we can deal with it accordingly. I think that Raging Bolt also forces great chip for the Annihilate, whether it be with a Choice Specs variant, whether it be with a Heavy Duty Boots variant, whether it be a Eject Pack variant to Draco and get out of there. I think it definitely does look really strong here. And then Furgraph is a great defensive glue. Terra Water, in particular, is great. With Sap Zipper, you're going to wall the Ogerpon, and you're going to pass great wishes into the rest of the team. You're going to check a lot of that physical offense, unless your name is Iron Hands, realistically. You're also going to be a Fire Resist, which this team doesn't have up to this point, which is great into the Arcanine. Now, as for Chimpact time, I think that standard, knockoff taunt Torn goes absolutely crazy. I think you just be Hurricane, knockoff, U-turn taunt, and be in a good spot. You don't want to run Bleak Wind, because you really don't want to give things like Empo and Annihilate that, Defiant or competitive boost, but Hurricane still going to be very strong naturally and be very annoying. You're going to knock off items, you turn around. I mean, things like Bolt, Empo, can kind of switch into you, but they're not going to appreciate coming in, hazards, knock, U-turn every single time. It's really going to put Emvee in an unfortunate spot. I think the SD offensive hands looks really strong. You have the option of going Booster, Lefty, Citrus, Punching Glove, Weakness Policy. I mean, probably not Weakness Policy, actually, it's pretty bad here. But really, the options are infinite. You can even go a Shuckleberry variant. It really does look strong. You can go Dual Stabs plus Play Rough to absolutely nuke through the Annihilate, and you're going to be in a pretty good spot. I think that Tinglu walls half the squad. It's very annoying. Now, there's a lot of pressure on it, but thankfully, Screamtail also walls half the squad, passes Good Wishes, can be annoying with Encore, and really be a great team supporter in general. I think Special D-Knight, mixed or Special, I lean Special, is also really strong here. Dragon Flying is great in this matchup, plus some kind of coverage for Emperor, probably Thunderbolt, and you're going to be in a pretty good spot with that guy. And then Arcanine also looks really strong offensively. There's not much that switches into Choice Band or Choice Scarf, Head Smash, and Flare Blitzes, and Drifblim can always, Drifblim can always get out of hand, sorry, but I also meant to say Reverum. Terra Steel Reverum, actually, I really like this matchup. Terra Steel Ironhead plus High Horsepower is very free, alongside, Stab Poison to hit anything that duo doesn't hit already, but I realistically don't really know what that is, to be honest. I guess it would be... Yeah, I don't know. Terra Steel Flygon would be an issue for that, but you just have to kind of chip it accordingly, or see if it's actually Terra Steel, and maybe it's Terra Electric, but, it really does, depend. I am going to lean Chimpact in this matchup. I think Emvee has some cool tools, and if he preps creatively like last week, he definitely has a shot to pull it out, but I think Chimpact's team just matches up really well into his. For our last matchup of Week 4 draft notes, we have the Thunderclap Titans and Uzi and PlayMore Esports, and I don't know what their team name is. I think it's just PlayMore Esports, to be completely honest. But from Uzi's side, I think that Dragapult looks really strong. I think Mixpult is incredible with hazards. Really, you need Shadow Ball, Dragon Darts, and that's about it. You don't need much else. You could tack on moves like Flamethrower if you really need to for things like Amoonguss. I guess something like Thunderbolt could also be. Really, you're just going to kind of U-turn around forever and be very, very annoying. You can also be a sub variant. I think the sub is also solid. You can even be mixed DD with Shadow Ball plus DD Dragon Darts and do a lot of damage after you chip down those dragon resists in the early game, which is really nice. I think that Chiyu also looks insane in this matchup. Whether it be a Choice Specs variant, whether it be a Choice Scarf variant, or just a Boots Nasty plot set, it really does put on a ton of pressure. I think that Iron Tread spins really well. It can go either Resist Berry, that it typically runs either a Chopple or a Shuka. I think both are very viable, to be completely honest. And it's great because that Ice Spinner is going to nuke through the main hazards mod in the Garchomp, and offensively it actually looks pretty darn strong if that's a SPL Vapo, which I do expect it to be. So I think Deoxys defense is really strong defensively. You can kind of tailor to check whatever you want. Me personally, I'm probably making a little bit more Fizz Def so I can check the likes of SD Val as well as the potential of a Garchomp, which can be really, really scary. And even something like last year if it's not Swords Dancing, which is nice. I think Azu is a really strong revenge killer into a lot of the team. Okidogi is really difficult to pivot around for PlayMore, and Terra Fairy Rotom is insane here. I really do like it a lot. It checks the heck out of Garchomp, kind of freeing up your DO a little bit, and realistically your just normal dual stabs do enough to this team. You could go Terra Blast in the last slot, you go Nasty Plot 3 attacks, you go Pain Split, you go Willow, you could do a ton of different things on this thing, honestly, and be a big problem for PlayMore. Speaking of PlayMore though, Vala is always strong. I would probably go Specs here. I know that Swords Dance kind of seems like the normal set on paper, but I do think that Uzi's going to have to very much so account for that in the builder, and ones like physically defensive Deoxys and things like that. It's not going to break through it the way that you want it to. So instead, I think it is much more worth going with a more special-oriented set, clicking Specs Moonblast and Prospering. We're looking at the calc, and if it's offensive treads, it takes like, you know, it gets to a KO'd after hazards by Moonblast, which is insane. Now, granted, it might be an AV set. It's probably going to be a little bit more especially defensive, or a little bit more bulky in general, but the fact still remains, you can kind of just click Moonblast. It's like a 1 or 2 time check, and that's it. After that, Yoko everything with Moonblast, pretty much, or 2-hit KO everything. So, I really like that one. I think Scarf Chomp is very viable. It revenges things like Pult, revenges Scarf Chiyu, revenges non-booster treads or non-spun treads, as well as Scarf Oki, things like that. It's a little hard to lock a move, but you do have good moves for every single situation, especially if you do get up any hazards or anything like that. I also like SPL Vapo. Now, the only issue is I think SPL Wish Protect Vapo is very passive, whereas I think that potentially as something as wacky as like an AV set could be really solid here. Max SPL AV takes nothing from Chiyu hits. I mean, like, in the 20% at maximum. And Amel actually came up with this idea too, of kind of just coming in, flip turning, and getting onto your offense. I think that'll kind of suit PlayMore's agenda a little bit better and put them in a better spot overall. I did want to mention, this isn't a great Pokemon. This might be the worst Metagross matchup ever. Pult, Chiyu, Treads, Azu. And then guys like Dio, Rotom Fan, Pre-Terra, like a Alolan Persian, it does nothing in this game. The only thing I can see you doing is bring like Band Explosion or Specs Steel Beam because it's funny. It's a really terrible meta matchup, which is never a good thing with a team like this. I think that Cerule Edge and Jugu are also just really strong. I like Booster Speed Jugu a ton. It's a great revenge killer to a lot, and actually has some pretty solid endgame potential. I think that Amoonguss can also come to check the likes of Azumarill and other physical offense on the team, which is really, really nice. And then Terra Glacier looks great. Probably Terra Electric. Terra Fairy is also viable, but it's a really, really strong mon in this matchup. Overall, I am going to go with Uzi in this matchup. I think that his top 3 are so good, and his defensive backbone is also very solid, whereas PlayMore really only has one great offensive Pokemon in Valiant, and one mediocre one in Jugelis, and other than that, they really do struggle offensively in this matchup. And with how offensive Gen 9 is, I'm going to have to lean Uzi. And that is going to go ahead and be our draft notes for week 4. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below. If you have any different ideas on matchups, if there's anybody else that you want to see me interview next week, go ahead and drop it in the comments below. Thank you to Kyle for coming on once again. I really do appreciate it a ton. And yeah, with that being said, I will see you guys next week. Enjoy the games this weekend. Later.